flagship programs at, no, that's okay. I just gave the secret to life before we started that recording. So tonight I am going to talk about the From Seas to Shoreline program. And prior to that, I'm going to give a little bit of information about Sea Grant, very briefly about my organization and kind of what we're about. And then very broadly, we're going to talk a little bit about the salt marsh ecosystem. And that's only to give a little bit of context about why we chose to do and pursue this program. So that's kind of the overview of what we're going to talk about over the next 20-30 minutes. So just to get a flavor, I thought anybody who knows me knows I appreciate things being serious all the time. Not really.
When is it impossible to plant flowers?
When?
When you haven't bought any. When is it impossible to plant flowers?
When?
When you haven't bought any.
Okay. So I just had to, yes. Oops, now I'm just totally messed up everything. All right, there we go. All right. So I just wanted to get the litmus test about your sense of humor. So now I know. But raise your hand here if you've ever heard of Sea Grant before tonight, and you can't look at my, okay. All right, well, good. Well, I always like to take a few minutes and just talk a little bit about Sea Grant. In case you haven't heard of Sea Grant, you will hopefully know a little bit more about us tonight. But South Carolina Sea Grant is part of a national program, and there are 34 programs across the United States. We're represented in each of the coastal states as well as the states around the Great Lakes. So we are funded, the National Sea Grant Program is funded by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, which is that logo down in the bottom right-hand corner there. So most of the Sea Grant programs are aligned with one major university or one major research institution. So for example, in Georgia, Georgia Sea Grant is part of the UGA system. North Carolina Sea Grant is part of NC State's system. So in South Carolina, we do things a little differently. I can say that and pick on my home state because I'm from here. But South Carolina, you'll always see the word consortium after South Carolina Sea Grant, because we're not just aligned with one university or research institution. We are a freestanding state agency. So thank you for your tax dollars. So we get some funds from state funds, also federal funds as well from NOAA. And then we also leverage a lot of grants. So we go after a lot of grants to support our work. We are a consortium. So what that means is that we're not aligned with one university, but we have 9 major universities and research institutions that we're able to work with across the board. So being independent and freestanding means that we can really align ourselves with different research projects and issues that are going on that we want to address through coastal research, education, and extension. So the yellow symbols there represent the locations of some of our major institutions. Of course, Charleston has 4 represented there. And then the blue are the satellite offices for some of those major institutions. And then just in the past couple of years, we welcomed Francis Marion University as part of our consortium. So we're really happy to have Francis Marion as part of our institution. So it's South Carolina Sea Grant Consortium. Our motto is Coastal Science Serving South Carolina. We do that through education, extension, research, and supporting coastal research as well. We have 5 focus areas. I won't read through all of them, and I'm sorry the text got a little wonky there. But we have 5 major 5 focus areas that really frame everything that we do. And so my job, I feel like I've got the best job in the world, I'm the marine education specialist. And so I focus on scientific literacy and workforce development. And what that means is that I'm able to focus on these other 4 focus areas, stay really abreast of a lot of the research that's going on, and then package that information and give it out to my main target audience, which a lot of times are teachers and other educators, their students, and then the general public. So I'm kind of a broker, if you will, of research that's going on about our coast. So that's a little bit about us. So before we get started, I'm going to just give us a little bit of background about salt marsh ecosystem. And so raise your hand if you feel pretty knowledgeable about the salt marsh ecosystem. Anybody gotten stuck in the pluff mud? I know Mike does. Mike is like, especially with the salt marsh volunteer hat on. Anybody gotten stuck in the pluff mud before, ventured out there, lost a shoe or 10 like I have? All right, well, good. All right, so just a little bit of background about salt marshes. So this map is the South Atlantic region, going from northeastern Florida up through North Carolina. And the green shaded areas are acres of salt marsh. So panning out, so salt marshes are a type of wetland. So somebody hazard a guess and just guess how many acres of wetlands, not just salt marshes, wetlands we have in South Carolina. Acres. You know?
Thousands.
Yes, thousands. Close. So we have, very good. So we have about over 500,000 acres of wetlands. So this includes our freshwater and saltwater brackish systems. You'll see about 350, sometimes 400,000 acres of those are considered to be salt marsh. So well over half of the wetlands that we have in South Carolina are considered to be salt marsh. Putting this in the South Atlantic perspective, there's over 1 million acres of salt marsh. South Carolina contains or represents about over a third of the salt marsh that we have here in this region. So for a pretty small state, we have a lot to brag about. We have a lot of good salt marsh represented here in our state. So very basic cross-section about salt marshes and kind of where they are in relation to our freshwater system. So like our freshwater rivers as compared to the ocean, so full strength seawater. So salt marshes grow up around what we call an estuary or brackish water systems. And what this means is that you've got a freshwater system. A lot of times I'll use a river flowing towards the ocean. Not always, it could be a groundwater source of fresh water, mixing though with a saltwater body. So you've got fresh water mixing with salt water, and where you have those two meet is where you have a brackish water system or an estuary. So where you have an estuary and brackish water system, this is where you will have salt marsh present. It can grow very well in fresh water, the plants there, but they get outcompeted by other plants. They can't handle full strength seawater, but they've adapted to dealing with a lower salinity area of water that we call an estuary. So when I say salinity, that means how we measure salt. And so in our freshwater systems, especially at the headwaters of our rivers, salinity or the salt content is 0. We measure in parts per thousand. Mixing with full strength seawater is 35, sometimes 37 or 38 parts per thousand. Where those two meet is where we get that brackish water system. So salinity is going to be somewhere in between 0 and 35, 37, 38 parts per thousand. Very dynamic system because we have tides, high tides and low tides every day. So twice during the day, you get more ocean coming in during high tide. So those estuaries are going to have a higher salinity. If we get a hurricane or a big rain event, sometimes that salinity will lower because of the fresh water that's coming in. So the system is very, very dynamic. And so the animals and plants live there have to be pretty hardy to live here. Putting in perspective, these are just some of the major estuaries that we have along the coast. When you see these on the map, they're called a little bit different. Port Royal Sound. So anytime you hear the word sound in South Carolina, that represents an estuary. St. Helena Sound near Colleton County is another one. Charleston Harbor is an estuary. And up here, anybody know the one that's close by you all? North Inlet Winyah Bay. Yep. So that's your major estuary in this location. Salt marshes have a lot of great, we call them ecosystem services or benefits. And so a lot of these you may very well be familiar with, but especially when I teach students and they look at the salt marsh and they're like, oh, it's stinky and buggy and gross. I just have to say, who likes to eat seafood? And every hand goes up, right? So salt marshes are a really great nursery ground for a lot of those seafood species that we like to eat. So things like shrimp, crabs, oysters, flounder, a lot of our finfish. So it's a great nursery ground for those juveniles. They have they have lots of places to hide from predators. And then depending on the species, they can stay in the salt marsh or they can migrate back and forth from the ocean back to the estuary, or just go on out to the ocean, depending on the species. It's a great resting place for migrating birds. Who here is a birder? Who here likes, okay. So it's a great resting place for migrating birds. Salt marshes have very few predators a lot of times for birds to come and just take a rest. There's also a really great food source. So this great egret is feasting on a shrimp out there in the salt marsh and estuary. So lots of good food for these migrating birds. It's a great buffer, natural buffer for our big storms and storm surge. Those people who've walked in the pluff mud before, it's not hard. You'll sink in it. So that pluff mud's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's able to hold on to a lot of water. It can hold on to a lot of volume of water. What that means is when you get these big storms coming through, all that water has got to go somewhere, and that salt marsh is able to retain a lot of water. So it may not prevent flooding, but it certainly helps. And then there are other ones. It's a great habitat for a lot of wildlife, has a ton of nutrients cycling through, great capacity for water, like filtering of water. So lots of great benefits that the salt marsh provides. It's not hard to see that this is definitely an ecosystem we should love on a lot, because it provides quite a bit of services for us. I won't dwell on this one a lot, but coastal wetlands are getting a lot of recognition for helping to mitigate climate change. Wetlands, and especially coastal wetlands, are considered to be a coastal sink. And what that means is that they're able to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, bury it for a really, really long time. So they're getting a lot, and compared to forests, they're able to not only store it at a faster rate and at a greater amount than forests. And this is not to ding forests, but it's just to say that coastal wetlands are getting a lot of really positive press, for lack of a better word, for their ability to serve as a carbon sink. Threats to the salt marsh. So we talked about all the positive. So really quickly, not to dwell on the negative, but there are many threats to the salt marsh ecosystem. This is a graphic of Charleston from 1973 to 2030, just a few short years away. That red is all urban development there. So as our population continues to grow within our coastal states, we have things like, stormwater runoff, pollution, habitat loss for wetlands. Now, when they're trying to keep up with sea level rise, a lot of salt marshes, it's called marsh migration. They try to move inland. But if you have a hard structure there, the salt marsh can't move. And so a lot of times you'll find certain areas where salt marshes can drown. So this is just something that, to be aware of, that as we're looking at, how can we be good stewards of the salt marsh? This is one of the things that we're, to keep in mind. This is a ongoing threat to the salt marsh ecosystem as we continue to see growth along our coast. So when we talk about the salt marsh, there are subzones and everything, but just for simplicity's sake, when we delve into some of the plants and the vegetation in the salt marsh, it's easy to categorize these into 4 main zones. And starting over there on the far right-hand side, imagine if, we parked our car and we're like, I want to walk out to the salt marsh. You're going to park your car and you're going to walk through these zones. So starting with your upland border, which is shaded there kind of in the light pink, then you're going to go through the high marsh zone, then the low marsh zone, and then you'll finally reach the water source of that estuary or tidal creek that's got that brackish water system there. So as you move from the upland border towards that estuary tidal creek, you're going to see a very slight decrease in elevation. You're talking millimeters, maybe inches of decrease in elevation. As you go from that upland border to that tidal creek, you're also going to see a decrease in the diversity of vegetation. Why do you think that is? The closer you get to that estuary and that brackish water system, why might you start to see a decrease in diversity of different species?
Too much salt.
Yeah, that's right. So too much salt. So not all these plants here are exposed to some level of salt. So they're basically in the zone that they can adapt to the amount of salt they're being exposed to. So once you get to that low marsh, you are really, really exposed to a salty environment. So, when you're in the upland border, you're going to see a lot more species. When you get down to the low marsh, you're actually going to be in a monoculture. You're going to have basically one species, which we'll talk about here in just a second. Again, the diversity of different plants that you find in the different zones, it's going to dictate the types of animals that you find. So now, of course, these animals can move back and forth, but you're not going to find necessarily a possum swimming in the tidal creek. You might, but where these plants are growing is also going to dictate the different types of species that you're going to find. So some of the common plants I'm just going to talk about really quickly before we switch over to the program. And I'm just going to reference, has anybody used this guide before, the Guide to Salt Marshes and Tidal Creeks? Okay, so this is a really popular book, and all the photographs I'm going to pull are from this guide. There's a digital guide that you can actually access. So if you're out in the field, you can access this guide on your phone very easily. If you'd like a hard copy, you're welcome to contact me and I can mail you a copy if you'd like. But it's really great. It goes over all the background of salt marshes and then some common species that are there. So starting in that upland section, again, lots of really great diversity here. Some of the ones that may be a little bit more common. Sea oxeye daisy, it's going to start blooming here in the summer. It looks like a little tiny sunflower and it blooms, and it's a wonderful plant for a lot of our coastal butterflies. So once that starts blooming, you're going to see a lot of coastal butterflies taking advantage of this plant. Salt marsh hay is another one that it's a species of Spartina that we'll talk about here in a second. This one, again, it can tolerate some salt, but not as much as some of the other species of Spartina. And then marsh elder. This is another very common one that you can find in the upland border in that zone of the salt marsh. So now moving our way down, we're going to go to the high marsh zone. And this is where we're going to see, not as much diversity in our plant species, but we're still going to see some. So that top photo up there is a shot of the salt marsh, and the green is part of the low marsh, but where it looks like it's burnt in the middle, that's actually a species called black needle rush. And whenever I see black needle rush, I know that the elevation is just slightly higher. Remember, this is a plant that's in the high marsh. So it's salt tolerant, but not as salt tolerant as some of the other plants. And so that photograph is just a close-up of black needle rush there. And then the two other plants that I wanted to focus on in the low marsh, these are two edible plants. They're succulents. And so, of course, when they take up water, they're going to hang on to some of that, but they're edible. So whenever I teach students about these two plants, the glasswort, its common name is also called sea pickle. And so when I tell students that, they automatically think it's going to taste like a dill pickle. Doesn't, but it's salty. So you can eat these, and they're pretty tasty. So, and some of these are actually grown, and you can find them actually being sold in some supermarkets. You can toss them on your salad if you want that salt fix with that. So, but there are two succulents here in that low marsh zone. And then finally, we get to the low marsh zone here, and it is dominated by one particular plant. It is, again, it's a monoculture, and it is Spartina alterniflora, or smooth cordgrass, highlighted there in the blue. And so Spartina in this picture is all that luscious green. Spartina is going to be that plant that is the most exposed to that brackish water system daily. So it's got 2 high tides, 2 low tides it deals with. And we'll talk a little bit more about this particular plant here in a minute. There are 4 species of Spartina in South Carolina. They're all found in different zones. Spartina patens, we just talked about in the high marsh zone. You've got Spartina sinusoides and Spartina bakeri, both of which are found more inland in some impounded areas, and then in some freshwater systems. So 4 species of Spartina. The one we're going to focus on is the one that is in the low marsh, the dominant plant in the low marsh system. Oh, and it flowers. Those are the flowers of that Spartina. So really quickly, I won't dwell on this. If you're not familiar with this, there's a whole thing about the name of Spartina. Are you all familiar? Okay. So it went through kind of an identity crisis a few years ago. And so the whole community had to switch from calling it Spartina to Sporobolus, which I feel like sounded like a disease for a long time. But anyway, there's a report that came out, 40 scientists got got together and basically supported the use of the name Spartina. I've got the research paper over there in case you guys are interested, but it all had to do with taxonomy and genomic studies and everything about keeping Spartina when we call it that. So I will skip over that, but if you're interested, I do have the research paper on that. Some people, really get very passionate about taxonomy. So characteristics of Spartina alterniflora. So it is a grass. It grows in that pluff mud, so that mud that's really hard to walk in. It's a very acidic, it's a slightly acidic soil. It's a halophytic monocot. So all that means is that it is very well adapted to growing in a salty environment. So that brackish water system. It does flower. It flowers in the fall. You may never see it, but in the fall, if you ever look out and you see it looks like little white hairs on the top of the stalk, Spartina actually does flower, and then that will turn into a seed head at the very top. It's a perennial, so it grows and dies every year. So right now it is luscious and green. As we turn into the fall, it gets kind of golden brown. And then in the winter, it's when we get kind of that dull gray color. It's not very exciting to look at, but it's really important because as those stalks die off, that's where a lot of those nutrients, when we talk about the salt marsh being such a nutritious or a nutrient-rich system, that's because a lot of these stalks are decaying every single year and pumping nutrients back into the system. And it's adapted to salt water. We've been talking about that brackish water system. It's adapted to salt water. It doesn't need the salt water. It doesn't want the salt water. What it does, it takes up that brackish water system and then it kicks out, it uses glands to kick out these crystals. So if you're ever in the salt marsh, turn the blade over on the back and run your finger up and you're going to get salt because you'll see that that blade extrudes those salt crystals continually. So it's able to grow very well in the salt water. So it reproduces by vegetative reproduction. So it's got a wonderful rhizome system, which is a really intense root system there. It's able to spread not only by the seed head that I mentioned earlier, but also underground with those rhizomes and pops up new stalks. It's rarely eaten. There are some things that might munch on it a little bit, but it's rarely eaten. Again, its role in the ecosystem is pumping those stalks back into that system. It can grow up to 9 feet tall, and the way it's able to filter out pollutants is through denitrification and sequestration. So it's able to take in this water and break down some of those chemicals that we find in our water that we don't want. So it has a really, again, wonderful ability to filter out the pollutants in our water. So if I were giving this presentation on the West Coast, I would probably not be liked very much because Spartina is native to the East Coast, from Texas all the way up to Nova Scotia. On the West Coast, Spartina alterniflora is considered to be an invasive species. So I would not be a welcome speaker at their Native Plant Society for this particular species. So all that background is because the benefits, because of, the threats, because of just all the wonderful things about the salt marsh ecosystem led us to develop the From Seeds to Shoreline program. And the program is a collaboration. It's headquartered at Sea Grant, but we work very closely with Clemson and then the Department of Natural Resources and their affiliate programs for this program. And so what we did is we decided to do is we were looking for a program to work with some third graders. One of their state science standards in third grade was to learn about plants. And we were looking for something to engage students in their local ecosystem, but also address the plant standard in science that they had to in third grade. And we found that there was no any sort of restoration or volunteer or program that they could get involved in. And so we got together with Clemson and DNR and we said, well, can we grow Spartina? Can we see if we can, focus on a restoration program? And so we got this one entire fifth grade, there were 150 students in Dorchester County. We got them all excited. We're like, you guys are the first school ever to grow these plants. We're going to take you guys out in the spring. We're going to have this fun field day. You guys are going to save the world. Mm-hmm. And so we got them, these are all the seeds that they planted of the Spartina seeds. And we took all these trays to one of the Clemson greenhouses, and there were thousands, y'all, there were thousands of seeds in these trays. And they were supposed to sprout within a week. And 1 week went by, nothing. Second week went by, nothing. Third week went by, and I was like, we're gonna have a lot of crying fifth graders if this doesn't work. And so around the fourth week that we're trying to germinate and grow these seeds, we got our first stalk. This is literally the first stalk. So this is kind of our mascot if we ever had to have a mascot. So this is our first seedling ever. And so what we found was because we weren't watering them enough. These are wetland plants. They need water all the time. We weren't watering them enough, you know? And so once we upped the watering, we got lots and lots of germination. So once we knew that we could actually grow the plants, we didn't ruin these kids' lives, we decided to take the pilot and really develop a program focused on growing Spartina alterniflora. So that is what we ended up doing. You don't have to read the text, but basically what we wanted to do with this, From Seeds to Shoreline, was our ultimate goal was we were working a lot with coastal schools, and a lot of them had no idea, had not been out to the beach or the salt marsh, and really did not know a lot of the important factors that the salt marsh provided. So what we wanted by having schools grow Spartina at their school and then come out to plant it later at an area of salt marsh was we wanted to instill that stewardship ethic. We wanted to teach about the salt marsh. We wanted them to understand the benefits of it and then hopefully become good stewards of it. So that was our ultimate goal, was to engage students in a stewardship project and ultimately create future stewards. So the project follows Mother Nature's timeline, basically. So in the fall, we collect the seeds. And so I showed you a picture of the flowering stalk. Once those go to seed, that's when we have our students and our teachers collect the seeds in the fall. We then put them into, it's a really complicated stage. We put them in a bag of water and put them in the refrigerator for about 6 to 8 weeks because we mimic what is going on in nature. It's a dormancy period that seeds have to go through. And then we take them out of that environment, and then we let the seeds germinate. And so then in the spring, students will plant the seeds at their school and keep them alive. And then in the spring, before they get out for the break, their summer break, we take them out to an area of salt marsh, let them bring their plants, and then they can plant their plants that they've grown. And in the summer, we do a teacher training. So we get our teachers involved in this program. So 5 restoration steps. So seed collection, again, we collect the seeds. They look like little rice grains when they're ready. Second is that dormancy phase. That's super, super complicated. I can, take questions on that afterwards if you're confused on that. Step 3 is germination. So we take the seeds out of that storage and then we put them in a wet, warm environment and we get germination. And then after those seeds germinate is when we, and when I say we, the students, will plant the plants and grow them until their restoration day, which is step 5. And so during a restoration day, and you're going to see photos of one of your fellow members up here, but our restoration days take place up and down the coast. We go far south is Beaufort County up to Murrells Inlet in Georgetown County with our restoration efforts. The students bring out their plants, and then we have them plant their plants in hula hoops. And those hula hoops are designed for 2 reasons. One, so that we can get an acreage. We have them fill up the hula hoops, and we take measurements of how the radius of those hula hoops, and we can get a good idea about how many linear feet we've been planting. And then it's also a visual, because before we use the hula hoops, we'd have these kids, they're all excited and they plant their plants and then they walk right through them. So once we have the hula hoops down, we're like, please don't walk through your plants in that orange hula hoop. So it serves as a visual kind of crowd control, if you will. So during the restoration day, of course, the students are planting, but they're also taking measurements. They're counting stalks. So remember, they plant the seeds, but then those seeds sometimes spread in the pot. So you get additional plants that are growing. So we have the students take a stalk count so they can record data. And then they plant their plants, of course, in that hula hoop. So there's Mike. So we have wonderful partners up and down the coast that help us with these restoration days. One of our main ones here is Huntington Beach State Park at Live Oak Landing. We plant there, and then I think right next to the boardwalk, right next to the Nature Center with Mike. We also do a lot of work with Hobcaw Barony. We've got some sites at Hobcaw that we also do restoration days with Beth Thomas, if you all know her. So we work very closely with them. So just some candid shots there. I won't spend a ton of time on this because I know I'm probably running over here, but workshop goals. So the way we're able to manage, we have about 40, anywhere from 35 to 40 schools participating in this program every year. That's up and down the coast, and that's also inland. And so the way we, instead of us having to do every single part, it's a mandatory for new teachers workshop. Once you come to one workshop, you don't have to come again. But we want a captive audience for a one-day training. And what we do during that training is we talk to teachers about the importance of the salt marsh ecosystem. They learn about the From Seas to Shoreline project and program. And then we give them a whole bunch of different tools and supplies and resources that they can take back and use in their classroom. So we go through not only classroom applications, so what can you use along with growing Spartina, what can you do also with your students? You can talk about water quality. So you can build a watershed, which is there on the left-hand side. You could do a drawing, an art project, which is that middle program. And then we also take them through a mock lab, restoration lab, where they will collect seeds. We make fake Spartina. They get to collect seeds, then they get to pretend to germinate them. And then we go through cultivation strategies and, things, best practices on how to keep your plants alive. So it's very engaging for a one-day workshop, and then they're equipped with the tools that then they could go back and work with their students and hopefully grow a nice crop of Spartina. More resources that we have there. And I did bring some of those Spartina posters over here. So if anybody's interested, there's some Spartina posters there on the corner. So I wanted to end, this is a video that was recently created. And I wanted to just give a little background. It was actually shot during a restoration day with Mike out at Live Oak Landing with one of our teachers who teaches at Ocean Bay Middle School. And it's about a 7-minute video, but it should give you a flavor of the program itself. And you'll probably recognize some faces in it. So I'll see if I can cue this up.
I'm out here at Hobcaw Bay.
Oh, did I miss it?
Oh, you're fine. I'm just gonna make sure these folks can see it.
Oh, right.
Okay, I think it's
Okay. Thank you.
Barony in Georgetown collecting Spartina seeds. These are the gold. So that our kids can go back to the classroom and plant these. And then we do a marsh restoration day. By becoming intimately involved in these plants, they end up getting to see firsthand that they're making a difference in this world. And I think at the end of the day, any educator, it's really what our goal is to hope that, our kids leave our classrooms better people, making our planet a better place to live.
Evie, do you have hula hoops? Do you have enough shovels? I got my whole bag. All right, guys, I want everybody to grab something. If you've got an extra, quickly, Andrew, bring it over. That's heavy.
From Seas to Shoreline is the state's first and only salt marsh restoration program for students. And what the program is designed to do is to really connect students with the salt marsh ecosystem. We found that a lot of students living along the coastline have seen the marsh, but really had not had a lot of engagement with it. And we feel very strongly that by getting students and teachers out physically into this resource and really turning them on to how important this ecosystem is, that we are instilling a stewardship ethic with them. We want them to be able to advocate for the marsh based on their connection to it and understanding the importance of the services it provides.
Y'all are going to have lots of chances to explore the animals that live in the intertidal zone. We're going to be using seine nets and dip nets to help you explore the animals that live in the water. How many of y'all like to eat seafood? Everybody like seafood? What kind of seafood do you like? Shrimp. Where do shrimp come from? Hint, hint. There's one right there. The salt marsh, yeah. Turns out most of what you have been eating as seafood most of your life is actually salt marsh food.
There's some fiddler crab holes. Even if you don't see them, there are fiddler crabs in here. What about plants? Do you see a lot of different types of plants? What kind of plant do you see here? Spartina, the same stuff that you guys just planted.
We focus on Spartina because without this plant, we would not have the salt marsh ecosystem.
Look at the grass, and if you look carefully, you can see the little crystals of salt. It almost looks fuzzy, like peach fuzz.
Yep.
And that is the salt that's coming out of the plant, which is pretty cool.
It's really special to see teachers working me out of a job. They know the materials so well. They are absolutely becoming local experts in their school on salt marshes. And so it's really empowering because, you know, the more passionate they are, the more confident they are with the information, that is going to be directly passed down to their students.
Oh, wait, look, you can see the salt on my fingers.
One of the really exciting, unexpected aspects of this program is that we started off really wanting to be focused on stewardship and cultivating the next generation of stewards. What we found, though, is that these areas where we are planting the Spartina grass that the schools are growing, they are being restored. We have a model that works. Since the program began in 2011, we have worked with 134 schools, 185 teachers, and over 12,000 students. We're excited to explore new locations and kind of broaden that footprint.
I really enjoy science, and these field trips are really awesome, not just because I get to skip school, because I love this. This is one of my favorite things to do. It's just like be with the sift nets, help plant. I love this so much.
I had a field experience when I was very young. I was in elementary school, and that is what turned me on to marine science. And it was an experience like this. Even if they just walk away liking and appreciating it, that's fine. They may not have a career in it. Just having this positive experience is my goal, and leaving an impact on that level.
90% of the things we eat, seafood-wise, are from the salt marsh.
So it's not seafood, it's salt marsh food.
Yeah, basically. And also that enclosed spaces of water get really warm.
Yes. You think the water was going to get cold?
Yeah, well, over in the ocean, it was really cold.
So we can help them do that if we don't get those. Okay, so I think that's. Right, so I just, if you're interested in learning more, we do have a website about the project itself, and just wanted to leave you two photographs of our two areas that we work with very closely up here in the area. And again, I just want to give a shout out to Mike for being an amazing partner with this program and inspiring students. I mean, he does an amazing job with the students when we bring them out for the restoration day. And then the one on the right again is Hobcobarony, their discovery center there. So just lots of fun that we have at both of those places. And so I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm sorry, I hope I didn't take up too much time. There's a lot to share with you all. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Yes.
With Spartina and the West Coast feeling that was invasive, do they not understand the benefit of having the salt marshes and having all that? I mean,
They have totally different wetlands on that side of the country. So Spartina may grow there, but it's not native, so it's not something that they're going to want to encourage having naturally over there.
Salt marshes, it just doesn't have like
They
their own.
they have different wetlands over there. So our salt marshes they range from Texas on up to Nova Scotia. So our marshes here. So good question. Yeah.
You said they were fifth graders.
The first school that we did was fifth graders. Now the program, we go as low as third grade and we go on up through, sometimes we have college kids, but we go through 12th grade. So, yes.
How well do the plants survive?
It's a great question. So we grow them in fresh water. So remember, they're adapted for salt water. And so one of our concerns was the shock to the system when we would transplant them. So most of them do really, really well. We have had occasions where they will die off. What we found too is that sometimes the stalks will die off, but that root system is really strong and very healthy. And so the next year, you know, it'll be fine. They'll produce new stalks from that. So as long as that root system is solid, that's why I always tell kids, because kids are like, oh, your stalks are this tall. And I'm like, I'm looking at your root ball there, or your rhizome structure there. That's what I'm looking at. So good question. Yes.
Are the sites monitored every year or periodically?
That-
2011?
That's one thing that when we started the program, we really weren't thinking along the lines of monitoring at that point. It was more stewardship focused. And so we have not done that. And that's one thing that we'd like to do in a more, we've done stock counts and we've got anecdotal data to see, you know, photographs and things like that, but not continual monitoring the sites. So we'd like to though. Yes.
So how many square feet have you planted?
So linear feet, and this is with DNR and with us is, oh gosh, we just had a report done. I can tell you that 160,000 stalks have been planted. But I'll recall that before I just shout out a number. 3,000 feet. Just kidding. Yes.
Can you comment on living shorelines, how you're working with another program with oyster restoration? How
Yes.
that works together with Seas of Shoreline?
Absolutely, yes. So Spartina and oysters, has anybody ever done an oyster build or an oyster restoration?
We just finished one at North Myrtle.
Okay. So one of the there's a program through DNR where they recycle oyster shells, and then they will ask volunteers to bag up those shells and then ask more volunteers to go out and actually create an oyster reef. Because oysters, when they reproduce, they prefer to, it's called spat. When the juvenile oysters are looking for a place to settle, they prefer oysters. And so those bagged oysters are a great place for new oysters to settle and grow. So oyster reefs and oyster banks are really great at stabilizing the shoreline. And so when you've got Spartina and you've got oysters working in tandem, you've got a really great way to stabilize the shoreline. And so there's an effort called Living Shorelines, where there's an effort to work not only with Spartina restoration, but also with oyster reef builds to kind of shore up some of these places that are eroding or compromised. So did that? Okay.
So you have the oyster recycling, which is down by Huntington State Park. What are done with those? All of that.
So that's a great question. So, and I'm not, I don't know all the ins and outs, but I do know that the drop-off locations for DNR, they will come and pick up those shells, then they will clean them off, and then that's when they'll ask for volunteers to bag up the shell, and then other volunteers to come out and put those bags out and build a reef. So it smells really great when you drive by.
And just to give you an example of how effective it is, unfortunately, we lost our boardwalk to Hurricane Ian, but all those oysters you see growing out there, all of that is growing on top of recycled oyster shells that were put out there through the SCORE program.
Right. Because it's great to trap sediment, and once that sediment is trapped and not washing away, that's when the Spartina can then spread out and grow. So it works really, really well together. So thanks for that question, Mike. Great.
One last fun
Yes.
question. Aaron asked, how many hula hoops does it take to make an acre?
Oh, gosh. So anybody who knows me knows you'd never ask me a math problem or directions. A lot, a lot. A lot. Thank you all for your time and, thank you.
And then Tierney, I think you're up next. Let's see. Yeah.
We still don't have a jingle. Yeah, so I was trying to come up with plant of the month. And I planted this particular species in my yard. I purchased it from one of our vendors from our October plant sale. And it is flowering now. So I was very, very excited, and I really wanted to share it all with you. It is in the Apocynaceae, or the dogbane family, if anyone's familiar with that. And we actually have over 20 species native to South Carolina. And I feel like there's often a really heavy focus on just one particular species because it's become popular in the nursery industry. But we do have 20 of them. So I'm going to talk about a different one that we don't see quite as often, and just for the interest of diversification. Milkweed. Yeah, so before I researched this a little bit, if someone had asked me how many species of milkweed do we have that's native to South Carolina, I probably would have said half a dozen, but there are 20. And I feel like we plant butterfly milkweed the most, and most people are familiar with that, but let's get a little familiar with some of the other ones, because there's some really, really cool other types of milkweed. And so I picked Asclepias perennis, or the swamp milkweed, aquatic milkweed, sometimes called white milkweed. I am one of those taxonomy nerds. And Asclepias, strangely enough, is in reference to the Greek god Asclepios, who is the Greek god of medicine, which is very strange because milkweeds are toxic. So don't eat them. They are not medicine. And perennius perennis just means perennial, comes back every year. Swamp milkweed is great because, as you can see on the picture on the right, I guess your left, it can grow in standing water, intermittent standing water. And it can also grow in more average moist garden soils. So it's fairly adaptable in terms of the soil types that it will grow in. It does like richness, so like adding some compost is usually a good idea. And it won't really do well in like super dry sandy soils. But beyond that, as long as there's some moisture and some organic matter, it does pretty well. It gets to be about 1 to 3 feet high and about the same width. And it has these really cute little white flowers on it. Yeah. It is a coastal plain species for the most part. So the black squares are where it's native and it's very common, as opposed to the squares that are empty, which means that it's rare in that particular area. So you can see starting from South Carolina down through Florida. And then actually the coastal plain follows the Mississippi River up to Illinois and Kentucky. So that's why you see those black squares there, because it sort of mimics that coastal plain area there. The flowers, they're these cute little star-shaped looking flowers, but they're actually kind of diabolical. I was getting into the pollination ecology because if you know anything about me, I'm all about plant sex. And I wanted to know a little bit more about why these flower structures are so strange. I may have mentioned this before, but similarly to orchids, milkweed species have their male and female parts actually fused together into one central organ. And then they have these hoods here. And up inside of this hood, they actually puddle nectar. There's like a puddle of nectar there, which they actually replenish overnight. So daytime pollinators come, they drink up the nectar, and then they fill the hoods back up with nectar for the night pollinating insects like moths and things like that. They also have what's called pollinia, also similar to orchids. Instead of individual pollen grains, they have sacs of waxy pollen that are bigger and heavier. And those are on either side of where it says slit here, they're right there. And the flowers are actually very slippery. So when a pollinator comes and sits on these flowers, it slips all around while it's trying to drink this nectar. And hopefully what happens is it gets a leg stuck over here. And while it's trying to pull its leg back out, it pulls one of the pollinia off. And then the hope is the next time it visits the flower, it gets its leg stuck again, but this time it gets stuck in this little slit here, which is the female receptive organs, and pollination happens. Now, the diabolical part comes in where you have to be a certain size to do this successfully. So generally speaking, the larger bumblebees are more successful for this. And smaller bees sometimes end up ripping off a leg or they get stuck permanently and die on the flower. So it's quite fascinating. And that also means that only certain size insects are actually successful at pollinating. So like when you see all these insects and all these butterflies and stuff visiting milkweed plants, they are getting a benefit because they're feeding on the nectar, but they may not actually be facilitating pollination because they might not physically be big enough. I just find that stuff crazy fascinating. So these are the leaves. They are opposite leaved, so that means at each node there's two leaves opposite each other. This leaf shape is called lanceolate because it's kind of like the shape of a lance. This is the seed pod. This is sort of that classic milkweed seed pod, which is going to open up. I couldn't find pictures specific to this species, but we've all seen milkweed seeds. They have that floofy filaments on them that let them be taken off by the wind to be dispersed. And then these are the seeds. Milkweed species all need cold, moist stratification, like the Spartina grass does, where they need to be put in some kind of substrate, usually sand or vermiculite or something like that, that's moist and kept in the fridge, you know, for a few months to help break that dormancy and help them germinate. And of course, milkweeds are so important because they support our monarch butterflies, which we all know have been suffering. They feed the adults because the adults are generalists and the adults will eat nectar from anything they can get nectar from. But milkweed is primarily the only group of plants that their caterpillars can feed on. So by planting this plant, you're also helping the monarch butterflies. And that's it. Plant of the month. Any questions? Yeah.
What about the little tiny yellow aphids that get on this?
Yeah, typically they're oleander aphids, which are not native And you can either squish them off or you can spray them off with a spray of water.
Yeah.
You should not use any kind of chemical, even insecticidal soap, because it will affect the monarch caterpillars and pollinators.
Like wipe them off.
Yeah.
I rinse it with like a little spray bottle. Is that good?
Yeah. That's fine.
But they're not hurting the plant.
No.
Something to add.
Go for it.
So the cool thing about product weed is that it's found to grow in most of our coastal plains, most of our river floodplains. And it's kind of a recent thing that it's been mapped in so many different floodplains. And part of that is Billy McCord is doing monarch research. He's working with DNR, and he found these different hosts that for monarchs that weren't really known in the past, and he has found it. So he mapped this plant was mapped in the Waccamaw River floodplain, and then after Keith Bradley mapped it there, Billy McCord went out and found monarchs using it, and it wasn't known that monarchs were even using the milkweeds in the Waccamaw River floodplain, and that they were overwintering. It's kind of a new thing. It's new information that they overwinter in our floodplains, and they use this plant. Or actually new information that they overwinter in cities, southeast. So it's pretty.
Yeah, the ones that I planted actually never went completely dormant. Because I planted them in October and they did drop some leaves. They're still pretty small right now, but they never completely went dormant like other milkweeds do.
They can change the shapes, it grows.
Yeah. Yeah, they can take full sun to shade too. I forgot to mention that part. So they're super adaptable.
I had one I lost, I thought I lost 3 years ago. It's back this year.
Nice.
It went on vacation.
Yeah. Hey.
Woo, thank you, Toonie. All right, let's see what's coming up. This weekend, Moore Farms Botanical Garden Market in May. Yeah, they'll have a plant sale. They'll have all sorts of vendors. Charlene with native plants. Two of the people will be there, and I'm sure some others. That's about an hour away in Lake City. Is that right? And it's free. So
Yeah, and you get into the gardens for free to go to the event.
So Catherine and I are going, if you want to carpool. Just kidding. You don't have to go. All right, and then our friends with the Audubon are hosting green drinks, May 22nd, so next week, at the pit in Pawleys Island. Yeah, so our June field trip has already sold out. It sold out pretty quick. We do have a wait list and we'll monitor that. So with that being said, if you ever do sign up for a field trip and can't attend, just let us know. You can email us through Eventbrite or email education, Grand Strand Education at SCNPS.org, or contact us on Facebook, especially for field trips when they sell out. We want to make sure if you can't go, we'll get someone on the wait list to take your spot. So just a reminder there. And then we'll see you again, hopefully in 2 months here. July 18th at the Coastal Science Center, this room. Let's see. Yeah, does anyone have any events or updates to share? Yes.
Actually, I'm gonna put out a call for help. So our wonderful friends at Brook Green Gardens who have been so awesome in growing out sea beach amaranth plants for us, which is a federally threatened plant species, and is currently, this is the only reintroduction effort going on to try to restore the plant anywhere in the world. They have been especially ambitious this year. So I just found out that they have propagated 630 plants. And I have a school group, actually Ocean Bay Middle School signed up for the 30th of this month to help out. But that's way more plants we're going to be able to get in the ground that day. So if anybody else would be interested in helping out, would really appreciate it. So
Would they help on that May 30th date or
help that day, or we could schedule something for that weekend?
Okay.
Might be better. And I have my appointment book, so let's look. like maybe June 1st would be the first Saturday. Because generally Saturday's gonna work better for most people, I think.
Yeah.
The Friday. We could do that, we could do both, because this is gonna take a lot, it's gonna take a lot of hours to get that many plants in the ground. Okay. All right. Actually, yeah, I just wanna make sure we're able to get them in the ground in a timely manner.
We had
So-
volunteers from our group do this last year and they had a blast.
Yeah, so let's look at doing maybe both days. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, 31st and the 1st. Now generally because it's gonna be planting on the beach, earlier is better, so.
Oh, so this is not Ocean Bay, it's the Huntington Beach.
No, this was at Huntington Beach, yes. Yeah, Ocean Bay is the name of the school that's coming out on the 30th. Yeah, but like I said, with that many plants, it'll take probably 3 work days to get them all in the ground.
Okay.
Because that's like 200 plants a day, that's still a lot of plants, so. Is anybody adverse to early mornings? I think early mornings work better. I usually come in at 6.
Cool.
I could do 7.
AM?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, it's sea turtle nesting season. That's the norm for sea turtle nesting season. So,
I'll do her.
yeah, would 7 be too early?
So,
All right, so let's look at doing 7. Yeah.
And we can put out an email too,
Yeah.
speaking on behalf of Mayor.
Yeah. If y'all, yeah.
You might.
I'm sorry?
Send that out to Kurt's house too.
I'm sorry.
Send that out to Kurt's house.
Yes, yeah.
So
Yeah.
we have a meeting coming up.
Okay.
Tuesday, so
All right.
we can get people more then.
But yeah, let's we'll look at doing that May 31st and June 1st.
a 7.
And we will send out an email.
And do you want folks to like RSVP somewhere, or we'll just kind of show up, or they email you?
It'd be better if they email me, just because some of the areas I can provide transportation up the beach. And that'll take some planning to do. So yeah, if you could email me, we can send out an email blast. My email address is m.walker@scprt.com. That's your South Carolina Parks Recreation Authority.
Awesome.
Wow.
Wow.
Walker, MWALKER @scprt.com. Everybody get that done? Parks, Recreation, Tourism, PRT.com.
And we'll definitely send out emails about this and post it on our new Facebook page. If you're a Facebook user, come like our new Facebook page. You like our Facebook? Is that? Oh, you've liked it.
I'm a member of.
Okay. Yeah.
South Carolina Parks and Recreation.
Awesome. Well, it looks like we have another field trip activity.
All right, thank y'all so much.
Cool.
And on another Sea Beach Amaranth note, the Fish and Wildlife Service keeps up with observations of these plants. For all last year in all of South Carolina, they had 4 plants, naturally recruited plants reported. All 4 of those were identified by this group during your field trip at the Huntington Beach State Park.
Wow.
So that's great. That's also appalling.
Yes.
That we're down to like 4 naturally occurring plants. So
Wow.
this they're in a great deal of trouble.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. On that note, Justin.
Sure. So I'm Justin. I'm the administrator at Anderson Oaks Assisted Living, and tonight we had a great event with the Native Plant Society tabling our Sudi Dave's art show. So I just want to thank the Plant Society for being there. It was a lot of fun. We had a lot of coastal and natural art, and so it was cool to have the Native Plant Society and Trapper with Coastal Conservation League. Just kind of pairing those 2 together and with the Conway Chamber of Commerce. So definitely got some folks signed up with the newsletter, but it was a great tabling event. So I just appreciate y'all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Kayla, for tabling. Cool. Anything else? Well, if you think of anything, you can email us. We'll try to include it in our next newsletter or post it on Facebook. Other than that, you're welcome to chat. You're welcome to mingle. Kay brought some cheese and bread in the back for you to eat. I have 2 of those salt marsh guidebooks if anyone wants one. We have the posters. You can purchase your tote bags and you can purchase stickers.
Actually, I'll sell those posters actually too.
Oh yeah, $20. All right.
A little side hustle over here.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
And what is
That was spectacular. Wait, I knew you were gonna be great, but wait.
Yeah.
Thank you for accepting it. Yeah, that was a spectacular.